So, a while back, I made a hypothetical video on how Marvel can compete with DC's Injustice duology in the fighting game department. Seeing that rumors have been flying around that NetherRealm was surprisingly making a deal with them. And at the time where my channel was at like 70 to 100 subscribers, the video got a shocking decent amount of views and it's still going on. So thank you all so much for that. And since I intend to make more of these hypothetical and fanfiction videos on gaming and so on, I decided to think of another one. So I recently started replaying God of War and the Witcher games again and enjoying all of the lore, the battles, the world building and the fantastic characters those games had to offer. And as I'm getting excited for God of War Ragnarok after seeing the trailer, and I'm patiently waiting for the trailer for the new Witcher game to drop, I decided to ask Marvel one simple question. Where the hell is a THOR video game? A THOR video game would be such a blast, man. With the right studio and the right people that obviously care about the world and the entirety of the character, this game would slap so hard. And that's what I want to talk about today. A Marvel THOR video game that for some weird reason isn't made yet. I want to talk about how a game like this will rule. So first, what I'm gonna do is give a brief summary of THOR and why he's so compelling to me.
This drink, I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
THOR is one of my top 5 favorite characters in the Marvel Universe. The brief explanation I can use to explain THOR is that THOR is a king that fights for his people. Basically, he's a king who still acts like a warrior, a one-man warrior. THOR is the hero that would prefer to go through pain, torture, sacrifice and even death for his people. THOR puts himself through extreme lengths so his people would have a good life, so they won't have to go through pain and through suffering. THOR feels guilty for the actions he can't take to save the innocents, even when most of the time it's not actually his fault. And I know that from the way that I'm talking, it might sound basic or unoriginal. It might sound like this is usually what every hero is meant to go through or is supposed to go through, especially in their journeys. But when you read a THOR comic, you really just see how impactful and hard-hitting his character can be. The emotional and uplifting aspects of THOR stories are breathtaking, especially when done right. In the books, THOR is a Marvel god who goes through extreme lengths to make sure that his people have a brighter tomorrow. THOR makes it possible that everyone he knows and loves has a chance of living, to the point that he even gets a little selfish and hypocritical with his enemies, especially when it comes to the ones that he should have killed a long time ago. And I know that from the description that I've given, especially with the character aspect, it's sounding like THOR has a lot of similarities with Superman. Which, yes, he really does. But the biggest difference between both of them is that THOR knows and prides himself like a god. THOR knows who he is and the higher level of significance that he brings to the table. Unlike Superman, who sees himself as an equal to his friends, enemies, loved ones and teammates, THOR doesn't do that. THOR knows he's a god. And while he is humble and respectful, he doesn't shy away from reminding or letting anyone know who he actually is. Which is just some of the reasons why I like Superman more than him. But the point I'm trying to make here is that what makes me love THOR so much is that he's supposed to act like a king. But because all life of the realms, especially Asgard, matters to him, he chooses to act like the warrior, like the sacrificial lamb, so that his people get to have a brighter future, even if it ends up costing him his own life. And this is just the character that I'm giving a somewhat brief explanation about. There is so much about him when you dive into his stories. The internal conflicts, the friends, the overall world of his character is so compelling. The villain he faces, the one that pushes him to his limits, the ones that breaks him both internally and emotionally, and the ones that no matter what they do, he will always find a way to love and forgive them. THOR from the comics is great. He is one of the greatest characters that Marvel has ever created and developed, which is why it annoys and infuriates me that we have yet to get a game for this character. The lore, the insane world building, the mythical, magical and mythological aspects of it, the beautiful exploration of Asgard and other realms, the fleshing out of the side characters and what makes them compelling, the opportunity to show off THOR's best rivals, the best utilization of THOR's awesome Rooks gallery, the epic insane battles that we can get, There is so much to do with a THOR video game if it ends up getting a green light. In the hands of maybe the studio that gave us God of War or the studio that gave us The Witcher, with a creative team from people that love the stories and world of the character, we can have some of the best Marvel video games ever made. So, as a fan who is patiently waiting for this announcement, if it ever gets announced, I decided to come up with a little rough draft of my own. Basically my prediction on how I personally want the story and some of the side quests of the game to go. The game will start with Thor just waking up from a deep slumber and he's very weak. Basically, him and Loki had a very gruesome battle that almost killed him, but his mom put him in a very long sleeping state in order to save his life. But while Thor was sleeping, Null and Gorr conquered Asgard and all the other realms outside of Midgard. I'll give my brief explanation as to why I want Null to be the main villain later on in the video, so please just stick with me. But my reasons for this action is to set up a few things. 1. To show that most gods in the realms are already dead thanks to Gorr and Null, so no one believes in gods anymore. 2. To show how important Thor's presence really is to Asgard. And 3. Because I personally don't want anything Earth related in the video game. This is just a personal thing of mine, but outside of Thor just being with the Avengers, I always find Thor on Earth very boring and unengaging. It's his stories on other realms that I always find very interesting. Apart from my own personal reasons as to why I like it on Asgard, the mythological aspect of it is always captivating, because there's always something new to explore and flesh out. So, with Thor awake, weak, and seeing Asgard in ruins without any knowledge of the events that happens, he then starts his journey to know exactly what happened, who was powerful enough to cause it, and how he can find them. He first arrives in a small region, basically to have an idea on what happened while he was asleep. While he is there in disguise, he realizes that people don't believe in gods anymore, and the place that he chose to settle in is being oppressed by some believers of Null. He takes them down with the little power that he has. Basically, he takes the oppressors down, very similar to how Zuko took down the Earthbender from his episode on Zuko alone, freeing the people that have been oppressed and giving them a glimpse of hope that gods like him still exist. And Asgard isn't all lost and can be brought back to its glorious state. He gets his information on where he should go next and remind them that he is still alive to save and protect them. This is where his real and tough heroic journey begins. I want Thor, as he's going on his journey, to see the ramifications of Null's invasion to not only Asgard but other realms as well. The bodies of the people that died trying to fight back, so that Thor will understand just how powerful this foe really is. From here, he then reunites with Lady Sif. They bond a little bit and then he reunites with Beta Ray Bill. And then the main story mode will continue with these three. I want with each battle Thor faces, he slowly and constantly gets stronger and stronger. I want him to locate and find his hammer at Hela's domain, which will then make her the second boss battle that Thor will face since he woke up. I want Thor to find his remaining friends in her domain as well, which will be a sweet and emotional reunion, but then eventually becomes tragic when Gorr finally kills them. I want the main trilogy of Asgard to go through quarrels. I want them to argue, disagree, fight and forgive one another, strengthening their bonds emotionally and making them stronger together when they eventually go face to face with Null. I want Thor to free Enchantress from the chains of Surtur, which then makes Surtur to be another main boss villain in the game as well. I want the main trilogies to have tragic backstories and layers to each of them. Basically, I want Thor to blame himself for being absent during Null's takeover. I want Lady Sif to lose a warrior she had feelings for and was in love with during the invasion. And I want Beta Ray Bill to believe that all his people died during the takeover. The key word being believe. And if you know anything about Beta Ray Bill, you know how hard-hitting this must be. With all of them having tragic backstories behind them, they all get to connect and console with one another. This helps make Thor and Lady Sif rekindle their love for one another once again. So as they started as teammates in the beginning of the game, they end up as lovers towards the end. The journey for Thor and Lady Sif needs to be a very passionate and emotional one for this to be effective. As all this is happening, I also want to cut to the villains and flesh them out every once in a while as well. This aspect will especially apply to Loki, who feels somewhat guilty for what his actions eventually led to. So when Thor finally has his confrontation with him and gives him one final chance to change and be on his side, Loki changes this time and takes it. I want Loki to help Thor with the downfall of Gorr. And then eventually, when the final battle happens against Null, Thor and Loki not only walk side by side, but Loki in the end sacrifices himself to save everyone and the realms. So basically in the game, Thor and his main warriors in chronological order go up against villains like Hela, Malekith, Surtur, Fenrir, the White Serpent, Loki, Gorr, and then finally Null, where Loki makes his heroic sacrifice, gets an Asgardian burial together with all the friends and people that Thor has lost along the way, brings other realms and Asgard back to its glorious state. In the end, after all of this is achieved, Thor and Lady Sif ends up getting married to one another. If there was to be a spin-off or a sequel, then that will focus on Beta Ray Bill's journey to find his people. Some of the side quests or missions can involve a little adventure of Thor and Hulk. Basically, the journey will start with some people telling Thor that there is a green demon in their region. Thor goes in, sees his Hulk, have a fight against him, and then both of them go on a side adventure together. It's just a little fun quest that would happen outside of the main story. Now as for Null, I know that some of you guys will say that Null isn't actually a Thor villain and that he's mainly a Venom villain. And that's true, but to me, I personally think making Null the villain in the game makes it more impactful. Plus, the best and coolest part of King in Black comic storyline was when Thor showed up and battled Null. So what are we arguing about here? And I know some of you guys will say that the game might be a bit too long with the many characters and villains that I'm trying to use. But if you look at how long The Witcher 3 is on YouTube, the overall game is over 13 hours long. And that's because they had to explore and flesh out all the ideas that they wanted to explore. So, what's the point of this? Why rant over Thor? Why did I spend a little bit of time explaining this character and my rough draft to you guys? Why yell for a Thor video game? One that utilizes him and all his side characters to the fullest. Not you, Jane Foster. Well, it's because I want to see the Thor that I know of. I want to see the Thor that I read from the comics. The one that takes things too unintentionally seriously and isn't ashamed of his Asgardian roots. I want the Thor that doesn't compromise when it comes to the safety of his people. I want a Thor that holds himself high and mighty like he usually does. A Thor who doesn't apologize for being a god. A Thor that heavily feels the weight of the loss of his people and the failure to protect them. A Thor that goes above and beyond to protect the innocents. A Thor that isn't afraid of his enemies and faces them head on. I want that version of Thor. And since the MCU isn't ready to give him to me in a movie, then I'm hoping that a game can do it. Similar to what they did with Spider-Man on PS4, giving us the character that we knew and loved from the comics when the MCU were too scared to give it to us. And if you ask me, there's no better time than now to give us this game, seeing that the entire mythological and fantasy trope are currently on top right now, not just in the gaming department, but in the movies and series as well. I want to see Thor done right. The last time we saw Thor and was able to play him in a video game was, well, you know.
You should know, I'm not in the best of moods!
Wait, is that Thor?
God of War right now, most especially, is currently stealing Thor's lightning, taking a lot of similar events from the lore of the character and having their moment on the fantasy aspect of the gaming world. DC has currently opened their eyes a little and are hoping to have a seat in some of that success thanks to the announcement of a Wonder Woman game that hopefully dives deep into the mythology of the character. So here I am hoping that Marvel wakes up and do the same with Thor. But let me know what you guys think. Would you like to see a video game based on Thor? If so, did you like my ideas or do you have a different one? Is there any other character aside from Thor that you want a game based on? Let me know in the comments and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.